We will be hearing from the lived experiences of women and children that can be disturbing or triggering, for some at least. So if you need to take a moment to pause or step away, please do not hesitate to take care of your needs throughout the course of this program. However, our hope is that by the end of this program, we will feel the urgency to take collective action and amplify the voices of the voiceless to put an end to this violence. If this is your first time attending a webinar with IWA, a little bit about the Alliance. IWA is a global alliance of mainly grassroots organisations that address women's needs and issues, but also works with various non-profit institutions and organisations that seek to address the needs of women. IWA, the International Women's Alliance, is committed to the people's struggle for national liberation, sovereignty, and advancing gender equality. We are united in the liberation of women from historical oppression and exploitation. We aspire for a society that recognises, promotes, and protects the rights and interests of women. We intensify local struggles and campaigns against US intervention, war, and exploitation. And we strengthen international solidarity through campaigns, joint actions, and cooperation. More information on how to get involved will be shared at the end of the programme. So here we go. The situation for women across the globe has become more dire, and the need to organise women in our numbers has grown more urgent. Just last month, we were seeing the impacts of women and children with the budget cuts to programmes for healthcare and food assistance during the government shutdown. All the while, they bloated budgets to ICE to increase their presence in communities across the United States. In the United Kingdom, the pathways for legislation have become more bureaucratic, with new proposals on asylum, with refugees facing longer wait times and possible return back to their home countries. In Hong Kong, while domestic workers are fighting for better wages, they are subjected to vulnerable living conditions, either because of their abusive and exploitive employer or the lack of livelihood. Last week, a fire raged through the Wang Fuk apartment complex in the Tai Po district of Hong Kong, which houses about 4,500 residents, many of whom were domestic workers. Close to 159 people died in the fire, including 2 Indonesian domestic workers. At least 1 Filipino domestic worker and 8 other migrants were still missing. For the past 2 years, we've witnessed through our screens the butchering of women and children in Palestine. This because of Zionist Israeli aggression, backed and funded by the United States. It is for this reason international pressure has grown immensely in support of the people of Palestine. Just last month, on November the 22nd and 23rd, IWA joined other organisations with the International People's Front, the International League of People's Struggle, and the People's Coalition on Food Sovereignty, held in the International People's Tribunal on the US-backed Zionist occupation's war of forced starvation and ecocide in Palestine, hosted in Barcelona. The overwhelming evidence provided by the witnesses, combined with common knowledge of well-established institutions, found the defendants, the US and the Zionist entity of Israel guilty for violating international humanitarian law for crimes of ecocide, genocide, and forced starvation. In Latin America and the Caribbean, at least 19,254 femicides have been registered in the last 5 years. That represents a minimum of 14 gender-related women killings per day. Not crimes, killings. The persistence and increase of these crimes in the region demands timely response from our women's organizations to demand accountability from the governments under which these happen, and to fight for a different system where women are liberated. More and more, we are seeing the resurgence of fascism around the world due to the worsening economic crisis, which creates the conditions for the fascization of Western imperialism states and its puppets. The process of growing fascism around the world is the result of liberal democratic principles being replaced with more authoritarian and repressive measures, leading to more open fascistic terror, including the rise of right-wing conservatism. The crisis, burgeoning on the rise of open fascistic rule, is at the root of the violence imposed on the people of the world, with very particular and specific impacts on women and children, who are the most vulnerable when faced with crisis and conflict. It is for this reason the International Women's Alliance, together with its allies, supporters, and the broader international community of women who have banded together to wage these weeks of action and the context by which we are holding to today's webinar. Now we will move to our speakers. You've heard enough from me. Our first speaker is from the Alliance for Children's Concerns, Salinlahi. The speaker is Candice Sering. Candice is the local and international networking and campaigning program coordinator for the Alliance for Children's Concerns. She is a long-time grassroots community organizer, a cultural worker, labor and human rights defender. She is a staunch advocate for women and especially children, not only in the Philippines, but globally, in support of all women's movements for national liberation and self-determination. Thank you, Candice. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Pippa. Can everyone hear me okay? As Pippa said, my name is Candice, and I am from the Salinlahi Alliance for Children's Concerns based in the Philippines. And we are a new member organization of IWA, and we are super grateful to have this opportunity to share about our work with children specifically. So my focus will be on the role of children in our movement here in the Philippines, and the ways in which their participation is necessary in any movement for national liberation and global solidarity. So let's begin. So next slide. So I'll start with the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. This is something that many countries around the world have signed on to, and it basically outlines all of the rights of the child that every nation state should provide. And it emphasizes the right of children to join, attend, and contribute to discussions on the deepening of their rights and these laws. So this is important to highlight and underscore because I don't make up any of this information. And there are many rights that children have under this convention. Next slide. For Salinlahi, our alliance of several organizations, which I'll talk a little bit more about in just a moment, we highlight the 4 basic rights of all children. And these 4 basic rights are survival, protection, development, and participation. So survival is those basic needs of being able to live, to have food, clothing, and housing, protection, to be protected against all forms of violence. Development, which is to ensure that they have their access to education, be able to practice their faith, receive love, care, and other forms of support. And the last one, the right to participation, is one we like to hone in on at Salinlahi, which encourages children to participate in expressing their views and engaging with the issues that they face in their communities. So next slide. Wow, there's animation. Okay. So all children have rights, and it is our duty, especially the state, right, to protect and defend the rights of the children. So children are identified as anyone under the age of 18 and older than 18 if you have if you're unable to care for yourself. And so these rights that children have are essential, and yet the state continues to be the #1 human rights violator. So state perpetrated violence, it's important to note and understand, when it is experienced by adults, it is equally, if not worse sometimes, for children. So we ensure that we understand the experience of children is not separate from the experience of adults. And so the violence that women experience is also felt by their children. And as human rights defenders, as many of us are on this webinar, we also experience state repression. And as a result, in any of our advocacy for women, whether it's women, children, urban poor, rural farmers, those violations of human rights are experienced by children in the same way or worse. So next slide. In the Philippines, there are several different forms of state repression that children experience, from counterinsurgency, war on drugs. The Anti-Terrorism Act in the Philippines during the height of COVID was implemented by the Duterte regime. Memorandum Order 32 was part of allowing the police and military open, what's the word? Just a free game on how they want to implement the law. Executive Order 70 created the National Task Force to end local communist armed conflict in the Philippines. So the whole nation approach basically meant that all across the Philippines, what became most common is a form of harassment, which is called red tagging. And so there are continued fascist attacks and violations on human rights and international humanitarian law. Next slide. So this next slide just highlights the war on drugs in the Philippines is particularly significant. We saw close to 30,000 people killed, and of those, 122 children and minors were also killed and are to this day still seeking justice. Next slide. And this war on drugs continues, as well as a whole other host of violations to children's rights and human rights generally under the Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Regime. And so many of you may have known about his dictator father in the 80s, a very significant period of time. A lot of people's organizations were born in the 80s or formed in the 80s due to the kind of state repression that communities felt, the most vulnerable communities felt under martial law. Next slide. And so when we look at what the rights, those 4 basic rights that I outlined in the beginning, all of those rights become violated when state repression is felt in different communities. So we see common forms of repression under land grabbing, when there are transnational corporations that are allowed to take land from indigenous communities and displace them, destroy their land, destroy their access to healthy, safe, pesticide-free organic food, access to water, as well as the other rights of protection, development, and participation. These rights become violated when communities are under surveillance, when schools are bombed, and when children experience trauma and lack healthcare services to heal from that trauma, whether it be they witnessed a massacre in their community, which that has happened in the Lumad communities, or if it happens in the urban areas when their homes are demolished by the police that come and kick them out of their communities before their homes are destroyed for urban development or land development. Next slide. The participation one is key because surveillance means that children cannot speak freely, their family members cannot speak freely. Militarization in communities restricts movement. And the challenges that we have seen is that there is a decrease in the documentation that can be obtained and data that of the violations that occur in remote communities in particular. Militarization, because it's so intense, it's very difficult to reach communities of children to engage in children's activities. And limited lack of resources and attacks on human rights defenders, as I had said earlier. Next slide. I'll just go quickly through these. So we say grave child rights violations in countries around the world are gravely undocumented and gravely underreported. Next slide. We believe that children all deserve to live and thrive with their rights protected always. And we want to encourage children to understand the context of the world that they live in with historical material facts of the past, the present, and the future. So this is necessary for us to comprehensively dismantle the current militaristic, patriarchal, and political hegemony driven by U.S. interests. This is not just in the Philippines. Also, I want to highlight that what I'm describing is an experience that children have in many different countries around the world that face U.S. militarization and U.S. bases that are in their countries. Next slide. Here is just the impacts are multiple. Next slide. And it's necessary for us to take action through engaging with the children in their sectors and understanding the root cause of armed conflict. Why is our country so poor, or why are many countries so poor despite being rich in natural resources? And so our answer, I know I'm running out of time, and the next slide, we have children's organizations. So what do we do? Our work includes providing community psychosocial interventions, allowing children to play through doing cultural activities. And we do trainings for community workers and organizers on children's rights, on programming, and on psychosocial support. And for us, what we can do together is ensure that children are engaged in the work that we are doing. So creating and integrating programs within your movement work for your own organizations. I know many organizations have parents who have children, and bridging beyond childcare, thinking about the children's activities that include the campaigns and advocacy and awareness around the struggles that we are facing in the face of state repression. Next, oh, and in the bottom it says join our learning tour. That's a little plug. In 2026, our organization will be hosting international solidarity missions, specifically to go into the communities that need psychosocial intervention, and will conduct children's activities to understand what are the concrete conditions of children in these areas that face either state repression, political repression, or militarization and land grabbing. So that's in 2026. I can share more information if anyone is interested. And in the next slide, I'll just quickly go through these. These are organizations. So you see our children that we work with, who are often children of activists, have their own organizations where they perform, they write songs, they play music, they engage in production work. So either we go into communities and they learn about the fisher folk struggles or farmer struggles. They learn about land grabbing. Some of them share with other children to understand what their experience is like. And we engage in solidarity activities as well. So children are very conscious of how their struggles here are linked with struggles of children in other countries like Palestine. Next slide. I am almost over time, so let's just go, and I may be over time. So next slide. So another youth organization, acting in solidarity. Next slide. And these are some quick suggestions on how we try to fight together to end violence against women and children. It is by raising awareness about children's rights. So those 4 rights, please learn them well and share them, and ensure that the children you are engaged with, or the children that you have even, are aware of what those rights are. Put pressure on governments to fulfill their obligations under international humanitarian law, and demand improved mechanisms to monitor and document child human rights violations, and foster collaboration and join organizations to uplift the voices of marginalized children, in particular children, and amplify our efforts to coordinate advocacy strategies. Next slide. And that is a very quick overview. You see children are engaged in mobilizations. They join our rallies. They have their own particular child-focused placards that have their content. And that's it. If you go to the next slides, they're just our calls. Justice for all child victims of human rights violations. Next, uphold international humanitarian law. And the last one, stop killing children, end the genocide. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Candice, for that wonderful look at the work you are doing. And I must admit, I remember when you said the child farmers, we have to remember that more than half the farmers in this world are children and women. And we have to be mindful of the fact that climate change is coming down the road, making their lives even harder. So thank you for that wonderful contribution. Amazing work you're doing. We're now moving to Teresa Bolaños, and she's speaking from Mujeres por el Cambio. And I'll go straight to you, Teresa.
¿Aló? ¿Ahora sí? Creo que ya me escucho. Bien, gracias. Lo siento mucho que no pude preparar una propuesta gráfica, pero quiero conversarles que vengo de Ecuador en Sudamérica, con 18 millones de habitantes, es el 41% somos mujeres. En este momento estamos bajo un régimen de un gobierno de extrema derecha. En cuanto se posesionó, declaró la guerra interna contra los grupos de delincuencia organizada, lo que le ha permitido militarizar el país y agredir a los grupos más indefensos de jóvenes de los barrios más pobres por el solo hecho de tener un cabello largo, de tener una mochila, de tener un tatuaje, ha sido suficiente como para que les persigan. E inclusive el 8 de diciembre de este año se conmemora tristemente el asesinato de 4 niños llamados de las Malvinas, porque es un barrio muy pobre, que fueron maltratados, fueron ofendidos, fueron violentados y luego asesinados por los militares de una forma cruel. Bueno, este gobierno de extrema derecha, el 16 de noviembre, llamó a una consulta popular con la que quería eliminar derechos importantísimos que están en la Constitución. Derechos como el decidir sobre nuestros cuerpos, la no discriminación por la opción sexual, los diferentes tipos de familia, que hay un reconocimiento a los diferentes tipos de familias, el matrimonio igualitario, la participación de las mujeres hasta llegar al porcentaje del 50% en las elecciones, el derecho a el agua como un derecho humano y no a la privatización. Mujeres por el Cambio, con otras organizaciones de mujeres y organizaciones sociales, trabajamos muy profundamente, muy aceleradamente en los 13 días de campaña contra todos los fondos del gobierno y pudimos obtener una victoria contundente, que es una victoria popular. En las 4 preguntas consultadas, ganó el no, y había 2 preguntas, las más importantes. La una, que se refería a que Estados Unidos pueda construir aquí una base militar, y ya tienen los gobiernos varios acuerdos militares con el gobierno de Estados Unidos, pero hoy querían tener territorio aquí en las Islas Galápagos, y lo otro sobre la nueva constitución. Entonces, ganamos con el no, y eso fue muy importante. Sin embargo, este gobierno, que es de la derecha, no es representante, sino que es el hijo del hombre más rico del país, sigue fielmente todos los que el Fondo Monetario Internacional le indica. Hoy, por ejemplo, para el presupuesto del 2026, una tercera parte del presupuesto general del Estado es para pagar los servicios de la deuda. Eso significa que leyes importantes como una que se aprobó para la erradicación de la violencia contra las mujeres no tiene presupuesto y simplemente no hay cómo aplicarla. Igualmente hay una ley violeta con la cual se contrata a las mujeres durante 3 meses y luego de esos 3 meses simplemente se las despide, y con eso los patronos, los empresarios tienen ganancias porque les eliminan una serie de impuestos. Es una ley tramposa. La situación general en el país es sumamente difícil. En este año, en 2025, que vamos terminando, 8.272 muertes violentas por asesinatos se han suscitado en el país. Y en un país, como les decía, de 18 millones de habitantes. Ecuador era una isla de paz y hoy realmente es muy difícil vivir. Muy difícil para todos y especialmente para las niñas, los niños y las mujeres. En el 2025, 349 mujeres fueron asesinadas por motivos de género. Eso quiere decir que cada 22 horas una mujer fue asesinada. Y la justicia es tan lenta y tan vendida que si se quiere llegar a los autores de estos crímenes atroces, son las propias familias las que tienen que luchar para que se ejecute la justicia de alguna manera. Existen, entonces, quedan los hijos e hijas de estas mujeres asesinadas en el completo abandono, porque en varios casos se suceden que también la pareja se suicida o están detenidos y realmente el Estado no se hace cargo de esos niños. Pero no solamente es eso, el tema del trabajo y del empleo. 2 de cada 10 mujeres tienen empleo pleno. Las demás trabajan como pueden, vendiendo cualquier cosa en lo que significan los trabajos autónomos o lo que dicen el neoliberalismo, los emprendimientos, que son una falsedad, una mentira con la que le hacen creer a la mujer que es empresaria y la empresaria vende caramelos en la esquina. Y a más de eso, pues, hay una suma que va creciendo de niñas, niños y jóvenes adolescentes que están abandonando el sistema escolar. En los últimos años se han ido sumando cada vez más y más hasta llegar a una cifra de 450,000 que no han vuelto al sistema educativo. Eso significa que estos niños y niñas ni siquiera terminarán la educación básica y son los nuevos reclutas a los que los grupos de delincuencia organizada los cooptan para que sean sicarios desde muy niños o para que aprendan a estar en esos grupos de delincuencia organizada. El gobierno lo que hace es perseguir al pequeño delincuente, al delincuente común, pero no a las grandes mafias que están enquistadas lamentablemente en el gobierno, en los diferentes gobiernos que han pasado y en la cúpula de los militares y los policías. En el sector rural, en el campo, las niñas son las que menos posibilidades tienen de terminar por lo menos la educación básica. ¿Qué decir de aspirar a una universidad que cada vez se hace más lejana con los recortes presupuestarios que eliminan la posibilidad de que los hijos de los trabajadores y los obreros asistan a una universidad? Pero además de eso también hay una cuestión que debe preocuparnos a todos. Es que a pesar de los títulos universitarios, no hay plazas de trabajo. Es decir, que si antes se pensaba que la educación producía la movilidad social, hoy es sumamente difícil. Como me quedan 3 minutos, voy a terminar solamente con lo que significa que para tener un contexto más, 7 millones de ecuatorianos están bajo la línea de la pobreza y de ellos 3 millones viven con $1.70 al día. En la consulta, nosotros nos unimos con las otras mujeres y ese es nuestro propósito, aunque hay un movimiento muy disperso de las mujeres en Ecuador. Yo creo que es una experiencia en todo el mundo, pero nos tratamos de unir para cosas importantes como, por ejemplo, este tema del 25 de violencia, del Día de la No Violencia contra la Mujer, el 8 de marzo, el Día del Aborto Libre, pero sobre todo también tratamos de unirnos en lo que significa buscar respuestas y propuestas para salvar a nuestras niñas y a nuestros niños. Como Mujeres por el Cambio no somos ONG, no tenemos recursos, pero sí trabajamos con nuestros propios recursos en los barrios más empobrecidos de las ciudades del Ecuador, principalmente en Guayaquil, Quito y Santo Domingo, de tal manera que podamos conectarnos con esas mujeres, les damos capacitaciones, les hacemos conocer sus derechos para poder exigirlos, el derecho a la salud, el derecho a la seguridad. Les organizamos para exigir el agua para el barrio, el alcantarillado, para exigir que no se cierre la escuela, que les den los uniformes a los niños. Es decir, que también nos unimos para eso. Y hoy, como Mujeres por el Cambio, tenemos 3 propuestas importantes. Una es exigir al gobierno la moratoria de la deuda externa. El segundo es el cobro de las deudas a los grandes empresarios que evaden el pago de esos impuestos. Y lo otro es la reapertura del Ministerio de la Mujer, que fue unificado con el Ministerio de Gobierno, o sea, desapareció el Ministerio de la Mujer y fue unificado con el Ministerio de Gobierno en meses anteriores. Entonces son unas de las 3 propuestas más importantes que nosotros impulsamos, a más de muchísimas otras que son de nuestro trabajo cotidiano, con el que tratamos de hacer contención emocional con las mujeres violentadas. Agradezco esta oportunidad. Muchísimas gracias.
Well, thank you, Teresa. Thank you so much for telling us about the important work you're doing with Mujeres por el Cambio. I was horrified to hear that there was no budget for eliminating violence against women, and maybe it would be different if it was for men. But to think that every 2 hours a woman is killed is absolutely terrifying. And there's a huge societal breakdown when this happens. So really, bravo for all the work you are doing. Now, our next speaker is from the Palestinian Feminist Collective, Maisa Morar. Maisa is a Palestinian woman, a physician, associate, and dedicated advocate with over 18 years of active involvement in Palestinian organization spaces. As a daughter of Palestinian immigrants, her mother, Palestinian but Venezuelan born, and her father from Palestine, Maisa carries a rich diasporic lineage that deeply shapes her identity, worldview, and commitment to the Palestinian struggle. As a founding member of the Palestinian Feminist Collective, as well as the Healthcare Workers for Palestine Bay Area, Maisa has played a central role in building feminist, grassroots, and justice-orientated spaces within the Palestinian diaspora. Her leadership emphasizes the power of collective care, gender liberation, and community-based organizing, and she's especially committed to uplifting the experiences and voices of Palestinian women and gender marginalized people across that diaspora and beyond. Maisa's journey in Palestinian advocacy began early through the Palestinian youth movement. Here she developed her foundation in organizing and political education. Today, her life's work continues to reflect an unwavering commitment to supporting her community and advancing collective healing and fighting for liberation and equality for all Palestinians, wherever they may be. So now I'll hand straight over to Maisa Morar. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pippa. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, comrades, sisters, brothers, and friends. Thank you for joining this webinar hosted by the International Women's Alliance as part of the Weeks of Action to Eliminate Violence Against Women and Children. As we gather, it's important to remember that when we speak of feminist solidarity, we are not speaking of a liberal or charity-based feminism. We are speaking of a revolutionary anti-imperialist feminism, one that centers the lives, bodies, and futures of Palestinian women, Palestinian children, and all oppressed peoples struggling under empire. I speak today from the perspective of the Palestinian Feminist Collective to help name the violence being carried out against Palestinian women and children and to affirm their dignity, their agency, and their place in our collective liberation. When we talk about Gaza or the West Bank, we cannot treat the experiences of women and children as an aside. Their suffering is not accidental. It is foundational to a Zionist settler colonial project supported and armed by the United States. This project aims to dismantle family structures, disrupt generational continuity, and destroy the social and emotional worlds that sustain Palestinian life. From a third world feminist perspective, women's liberation cannot be separated from the liberation of their people. Occupation, siege, famine, and militarism are deeply gendered forms of violence, shaping every aspect of Palestinian life. And yet, Palestinian women and children also carry within themselves the seeds of a liberated future, even as the conditions around them are engineered to extinguish it. So consider this. The most conservative estimate is that 20,000 children have been killed in Gaza since October 7, 2023. When we include those lost to starvation, dehydration, infection, and the collapse of medical infrastructure, the potential toll stretches into the hundreds of thousands. These numbers represent futures stolen, children beneath rubble, children buried without their names recorded, children orphaned or disappeared into prisons. This is what the Palestinian Feminist Collective calls reproductive genocide, a deliberate effort to break a people by destroying their capacity to survive, to care for one another, and to continue their lineage. For Palestinian children, every fundamental right to safety, to health, to education, even to play, has been stripped away by policies of siege, bombardment, and displacement. And nowhere is this clearer than in Gaza. Hospitals and maternity wards lie in ruins. Women give birth without anesthesia, without clean water, sometimes without shelter. Infants are born into famine conditions. Many do not survive. Aid convoys have been turned into sites of chaos and death. Even the promise of food can become another weapon to this war. Sexual and gender-based violence has also been systematically against Palestinian bodies, against women, men, and children. A UN report finally acknowledged this in 2025, just this year, though its late recognition speaks volumes about the broader complicity of global institutions and the violence inside Israeli prisons, where children are interrogated, tortured, and isolated, reveals how deeply the regime seeks to criminalize Palestinian life itself. And the West Bank, it faces a different but parallel form of annihilation, raids in the night, the constant threat of arrests, school closures, the destruction of clinics and roads, settler attacks. These conditions erode the everyday rhythms of childhood and family life. Even without aerial bombardment, the occupation manufactures an environment where safety, continuity, and belonging are continually under attack. This quieter violence is just as intentional. It targets the spaces where community is built and where children grow, the very places that enable Palestinians to endure and to resist. In every corner of Palestine, women stand at the center of this struggle. They care for the children under siege. They nurse the wounded without medical supplies. They bury loved ones with dignity and safeguard memories that colonial violence seeks to erase. They endure imprisonment and torture and survive starvation and still find ways to rebuild and to organize. Their steadfastness, or what we call sumud, is a form of resistance that is both political and deeply intimate. It sustains community under conditions designed to destroy it. We must also challenge the narrative that portrays Palestinian children solely as victims, or in Zionist discourse as threats. They are, after all, children, with imagination and humor and tenderness and enormous resilience. They carry stories, songs, and memories. They anchor their families and communities. Their survival, their joy, and even their grief are acts of defiance. Their very existence disrupts the colonial fantasy of erasure. The violence Palestinians endure echoes across the global south. From Sudan to Yemen, from the Philippines to Latin America, the systems behind these violences are linked: imperialism, racial capitalism, militarism, and colonial rule. Our struggles are intertwined because these structures operate together. The Third World Women's Alliance taught us that feminism means confronting these systems head on. Our liberation is collective. It lives or dies in solidarity. So what do we do then? We bring this struggle home. We demand an end to military and political support for the Zionist regime. We join campaigns for the arms embargo. We call for an end to the siege on Gaza and for the release of political prisoners, especially the children who are being held and tortured in Israeli jails. And more than anything, we commit to centering Palestinian women and children not as symbols of tragedy, but as leaders, culture bearers, and protagonists in a global struggle against empire. Friends and sisters and comrades, the violence inflicted on Palestinian women and children is deliberate and systematic. But even as the Zionist regime and its imperial backers try to erase Palestinian life, they cannot extinguish Palestinian resistance, memory, or love. Palestinian women and children are not simply surviving this moment. They are shaping the liberated world we fight for. Their lives, their dignity, and their futures are why we struggle today and every day. Thank you.
Wow, I know probably too much about Gaza. That was wonderful. And also, you made it so horrifying. The child prisoners you spoke about, in fact, all prisoners are. It is almost unthinkable, the unbearable lives that they have to live. But the Palestinian unquenchable desire for justice, I think, is so strong. We all back everything they do. But almost nothing compares to the injustice of that land on the West Bank as well as Gaza. So thank you so much, Maisa, for the work that you're doing. We'll now transition to the International Migrants Alliance, where Rojas will be speaking for them. Rojas is an organizer based in the US with the International Migrants Alliance. She is a daughter of farm workers in the Central Valley of California and organizer for migrants and people's rights. She organizes with migrants from Mexico, Venezuela, Congo, Angola, and the Philippines, supporting migrants in their right to self-organization against the root causes of forced migration and for their rights and welfare in the US. So thank you. You must have your hands full right now, Ray. So I'll hand straight over to you.
Thank you, Pippa, and thank you to all of our incredible speakers. I'm honored to be able to share a little bit about the situation here in the US. As we know, many of the migrant workers of the world, women, constitute almost 70%. Many, based off of the stories we've heard today, have been forced to leave their homelands due to economic insecurity, the climate crisis, government corruption, war, and foreign intervention. And migrant women workers have to take up some of the most exploitative and abusive roles in society, all while having to live separated from their loved ones, including their own children at times. In the US, this story is no different. Many migrant women come to the US seeking stability to send resources home to their families and children, hoping that the sacrifices that they make will allow their loved ones to be less exploited and less repressed. Others make the treacherous and sometimes dangerous journey to the US with their children, thinking that they can access the so-called American dream. However, this is far from the reality of migrant women and children here in the US. Right now, many women's partners are being detained under the current Trump administration, leaving many alone in this fascist and violent society. And for those with children, they're being left to scramble to figure out how to provide livelihood for their families. Many who have experienced exploitation and state violence while both traveling to the US and as workers here in the US. Women are also at the brunt of the violent detention and deportation system as well. Women are being detained, and while being detained, are experiencing horrific conditions, which include overcrowding, inadequate or no medical services, uncooked food, physical and emotional abuse. However, women are not just accepting this violence, they're organizing to expose the situation from inside. Just this week, we heard a report from Tita Rebecca, a Filipina elder who's 71 years old, has had extreme health concerns and conditions while in detention for the last 10 months, despite already having received deportation orders, is still waiting in detention. She reported this week that the guards of the for-profit detention center she's being held in came in while she was showering twice to watch her while she bathed. She's being held. This all happened during this week of action to stop violence against women. And now she is committed to sharing her story and sharing in order to stop all future violence for women and for the elderly. In another case of Alma Bowman, when she was detained back during the COVID pandemic, she became a national whistleblower. She bore witness to doctors in the detention center she was being held in Georgia State that was illegally performing hysterectomies or surgeries to make it impossible for migrant women to have children. According to Alma, many detainees spoke little to no English, and the doctors exploited the language barrier to make women believe the procedures they were receiving were necessary to treat health conditions. But Alma knew better and spoke in solidarity with the other women who didn't know what was happening. And because of her fight, she was detained yet again under the second Trump administration. But due to the people's movements, was recently freed for a second time from detention just last week. As we've heard earlier in this webinar, the impacts on women in the US are also an attack on children, and their stories are inextricably connected. I'm going to share two stories about women and their children who are just two examples of the thousands experiencing similar situations here in the US. I'll start with a story about Victoria. Victoria is a 6-year-old Venezuelan migrant. Victoria loves the color pink. She loves Hello Kitty, and she loves capybaras. Her family is seeking asylum here in the US. And on Friday, November 14th, just last month, Victoria was called to appear in court to defend herself at a mandatory immigration hearing. Despite having arrived to the US with her biological parents, her immigration records were separated from her parents, meaning the US government is putting on trial a 6-year-old to determine if she should be allowed to stay. She would have been expected to find her own legal representation in the immigration proceedings. Her parents were fearful, but reached out to community members for support. They were confused and overwhelmed at the fact that their child is expected to appear in court by herself. They wavered on whether or not they would even attend the hearing, assuming it was a trap due to the outrageous idea that a 6-year-old was expected to come to court on their own. But had they not gone to court, she would have received deportation orders and been forcibly removed from her parents. However, community organizers were able to secure legal accompaniment and community support for Victoria, so she did not have to go alone. But as a child, she remained confused and scared to be ripped away from her family. To ease her anxiety in court, she hugged her stuffed animals given by organizers and practiced her math problems from school while waiting on the court bench for over an hour and a half. She was only one of a dozen children who were required to appear in court that day, ages ranging from 6 to 18 years old. Children were separated between those with representation and those without, and they were handed a packet of different lawyers that they could call, expecting a 6-year-old to know how to obtain a lawyer. The children were called up one by one, where the judge questioned each and administered their immigration proceedings as if they were an adult. Legal advocates shared that depending on the judge, parents sometimes can speak for their children. However, other times, the judges require the children to speak for themselves if there's no legal representation. How egregious is it for children to have to navigate an immigration system where the result would be tearing families apart or forcing parents or mothers to have to self-deport in order to stay with their children? Just this early morning, I woke up to the news of a 3-year-old unaccompanied child in the US based in New York City who was required to appear for themselves just last week. This is outrageous and horrific that the US government would treat women and children in this manner. My last story will be about Esther. We just learned, if we could go back to the last slide, actually. We learned about Esther just a few days ago. She is originally from Mexico. She's a mother and is currently detained in Louisiana. Her and her entire family migrated to the US from Mexico, seeking economic stability due to the devastation of foreign trade policies have on the people of Mexico. Earlier this year, Esther was arrested for accusations of drug charges, in which she was imprisoned for a period of time, assuming that she was guilty while she was pregnant. While in jail, she gave birth to her first daughter. While in the hospital, within an hour of giving her birth, the US government came and took her daughter from her arms and placed her in protective custody. Later, Esther was found not guilty for the charges she was accused of, and everything was dropped, and she has no criminal record. However, when Esther advocated to regain custody of her child, the US government refused to release her daughter back to her purely because Esther is undocumented. Child Protective Services, or CPS in the US, told her that the only way they would release her daughter was if she could meet the qualifications, in which, in their words, were she was a US citizen, or she could find a family member or loved one who was either a US citizen or a citizen who did not live with anyone who was undocumented. Therefore, none of her family members were eligible to gain custody of her child. She has watched her daughter grow up, now to 11 months old, by photos sent from government social workers. But this is not a law in the US. This is anti-migrant rhetoric that emboldens government officials to make up policies such as this one that enforce family separation and punish migrants for simply seeking a better life. Esther was only detained 2 weeks ago, and she wants to return to Mexico. However, she's fearful that if she leaves, she will never get the chance to reunite with her child. The US government stole her child from her arms purely based off of her immigration status. And we must fight for women such as Esther to have the right to be a mother and to be with her children. The Trump administration claims that he is detaining criminals, when in reality, it is women, children, and their loved ones who are the ones facing these violent attacks. This is why women and migrants organizations are coming together under these horrific attacks to fight. Women are coming together to create support networks, organize themselves and their children, and globally as migrants and women workers to fight the root causes of forced migration, to end the initial family separation that's caused by the conditions in our homelands that force us to have to migrate in the first place. As EMA, we call to an end on the violence against women and children and amplify the strong women's and children's people's organizations in our homelands fighting for their rights and liberation. Thank you to Iwa for this invitation to share about the situation. And we stand vehemently in solidarity with the women of the world, especially that of the global South, to fight for our rights and against this fascist and imperialist attacks. Thank you.
Ray, thank you so much. It's hard to know what to say. This is such a moving account. Things that I didn't know, and we all ought to know more widely across the world, not just across the US. So thank goodness for your organization and for the successes you have. But still, the system is so rotten, and you've shown us what I only hope is the worst of it, but I can't imagine it actually is. So thank you very, very much for helping us to understand the position of women and children in migrant facilities and in the courts. Horrifying. Well, I'll hand it over to Donna, and
No
thank you to
problem, Pippa.
IWA.
Yes, no, thank you. And just thank you again to all of our incredible speakers, Candice, Teresa, Maisa, and Ray. I'm sure these stories were not easy to tell. We've heard stories of the mass killings, the targeted attacks by the state, heightened militarization, and of course, the genocide in Palestine, the violence of detention and deportation, and just the sheer violence and fear that these children are experiencing and facing. And so I just want to acknowledge our speakers for the incredible sharings and just the heaviness of this information. But I also take inspiration from the dedication of these women and children who so bravely confront these issues of violence head on, as Maisa has stated earlier. And we also know that these instances of violence are not isolated, but are in fact part of a larger systematic problem. And I think it's important for us to know that we are living in a world where those in power are in fact losing the longer battle for sustainability of the people and the planet, because they have had to resort to repressive measures, force and violence in an open fascistic manner, because the space for liberal democracy, quite frankly, is not working for the majority. The worsening crisis is the result of the parasitic nature of this monopolistic capitalist system that places profit over people. And when capital runs low or wealth for these greedy vultures are not enough, war and plunder is the answer. And we know the impacts of that. It is our view in Iwa that war, and especially imperialist war, is the highest form of systematic violence on women and children. And these conditions create the perfect storm for the onslaught of violent attacks on the people, and particularly to women and children, who are the most vulnerable in times of conflict and crisis, and therefore face the most egregious forms of violence. We heard about the massacres of people in the Philippines under Duterte, with the 30,000 killings, and 122 of them were children under the war on drugs. And in Ecuador, we heard about, this right-wing government and its military assassinating young children. We, of course, cannot ignore and deny the genocide that's happening in Palestine, the ecocide, the genocide, the forced starvation, and complete eradication of the land of the people in Palestine. And then, of course, the horrific stories of migrants being faced by this fascist administration, who so blatantly put children, meant to defend themselves against their own deportation proceedings. I mean, how egregious is that? And we know that all of these forms of violence have residual impacts, long-term impacts. Yet these governments and these states continue to operate with impunity. We know that there are many, many more issues and cases of violence that cannot go unmentioned. The violence happening on women and children in Sudan, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the impending regional wars, especially in Asia Pacific, with growing tensions between US and China, and more recently, the aggressive provocations by the United States with Venezuela, and so much more. These problems are the doing of the ruling elite, who not only reap the benefits from the exploitation of people and plundering and destruction of land, but are also those who hold political power. Therefore, we must hold these states accountable for their violations of the rights of the people, for the violations inflicted on the communities. And the worst perpetrator of violence of them all is US imperialism. US imperialism has become the silent hand with very loud implications for its culpability in its complicity in the genocide in Palestine, violating the sovereignty of nations like Venezuela and Iran, and imposing neoliberal policies on the global economy, causing many countries in the global south to go further into debt. The rule of divide and conquer may have been a tool of colonizers and imperialists of the past, but soon the power of the people will outmode that of the imperialists. Just need a moment. Because women are at the front lines, fighting every day to build a broader and stronger international movement to put an end to this rotten imperialist system that's at the root of the suffering and the extreme violence experienced by not just women and children, but all people. And when these conditions are insufferable, it is also our belief in Iwa that the people, including the women, have every right to resist, even if it means taking up arms in the name of self-defense, in defense of their land, their sovereignty, and ultimately for their own liberation. These conditions and experiences of women provide the meat of our work, which is in Iwa's dual campaign platforms. The first to address this economic crisis and neoliberal policies that exploit our women through our Women Over Profit campaign, and the second to address the direct impacts women face due to war and conflict through our Women Against Imperialist War campaign. The waging of militant actions to get at the root of the systematic state violence and building international solidarity along these campaign platforms we women can build a new world and can contribute to unite and grow a militant mass movement together with all oppressed and exploited people of the world that will create the very needed systematic change so we can live in a world free of violence. I want to offer our highest salutes to all martyrs and victims of violence. We will continue the steadfast fight to put an end to violence once and for all, and build a new world where the people can finally live in peace, free from violence, free from oppression, free from colonialism, and free from imperialism. So thank you again to all of our speakers and of our supporters and endorsers for putting on this very important webinar as part of our Weeks of Action.